Alright, y'all, we're back. We're gonna get going with chapter 9 here. Okay? So, let me go ahead and pull up that stuff. Let me make myself small. Let's get this going. And let's take a look at chapter 9. Okay? Yo, chapter 9, the early republic. What we're gonna look at here, first of all, the last efforts. I told you at the end of the chapter 8 video that there's a little bit more to that revolution of 1800, a few things that happened after it, right? So let's take a look at exactly what those things were. And when I say last efforts, y'all, I mean last efforts of the Federalists. Remember, Jefferson wins the election of 1800, aka the revolution of 1800, and going forward, the Federalists know, look, hey, we lost. What can we do to maintain any level of power moving forward, right? So, Jefferson is elected, but he doesn't take office for a while. So John Adams and the Federalists are still in power, and they push for the midnight appointments. They push for the midnight judges. Okay? So y'all, understand this. At this point in time, Jefferson has been elected president in November, but he doesn't take the oath of office. He's not inaugurated until March of 1801. So when we look at that, what we're seeing here is that we have most of November, all of December, all of January, and all of February before Jefferson ever takes office, right? So at that point in time, the Federalists know they've lost the presidency. What can they do to hold on to any amount of power going forward? So they're going to push for what we call the midnight appointments, the midnight judges. They passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, which created a plethora of court positions. So they passed this act, the Judiciary Act of 1801. This is where we get the term the midnight judges from. Okay, and it created just a bunch more judge position, created a bunch of new court positions. And just before Adams left office, he signed the appointments. That's where we get the term the midnight judges. Allegedly, again, it's not exactly the way it happened, but basically, John Adams, at the last moment, signed all of these appointments. He appointed all of these different people. The Federalists passed this act, creating all these positions, and then John Adams, being a Federalist president, appointed a bunch of Federalists to the courts, or to those judge spots. Okay, the point was to put a bunch of Federalists in power. The big name here is going to be John Marshall, who was appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Okay. So John Marshall, that dude who was the leader of the Americans when the whole XYZ affair happens, he becomes the Chief Justice. So y'all, here in 1801, John Marshall becomes Chief Justice. That's important because y'all, remember, court nominees or Supreme Court justices, how long are they appointed for? They're appointed for life. That's why it's always such a big deal. Y'all, we have some presidents who never have the opportunity to appoint anyone. And here John Adams appoints a person, makes him chief. Y'all, John Marshall will be relevant as the Chief Justice well into the 1830s. So well after the Federalist Party is dead, some of these judges still are going to be in power. So that's going to be a big thing. Now, y'all, obviously this didn't go over well with a lot of people, and we're going to have some issues. Okay? So, this is where we get, this is eventually going to lead to Marbury v. Madison. Okay? Now, the Democratic Republicans hate this. They hate all of these judges. Now, they're going to impeach a guy by the name of John Pickering. Okay? And that's probably a good thing because John Pickering was kind of crazy. Okay? But then they go after a guy named Samuel Chase. Okay, so we got all of these judges in. Then the Democratic Republicans get elected. They come in and they try to get rid of some of these people. They try to get rid of all of these midnight judges. They go after, they first go after John Pickering. Again, that's probably a good thing. He was a bit crazy. But then they go after this guy named Samuel Chase. But this is bad because his only crime was being a Federalist, okay? So, yeah, it doesn't really work. Like, John Pickering, you could make the argument, okay, that was a good job. They had a right, they had a cause to go after. Go after Samuel Chase, and it's like, look, you can't do that just because a guy's of the different party. Like, that's not fair. Like, this is a loophole. The Federalists found the loophole. Now you got to deal with it, right? That's how a lot of people react. But then we get a big case. Okay, we get Marbury v. Madison. Okay, Marbury was a midnight appointment, but his paperwork was not delivered. Okay, his paperwork was not delivered under John Adams. Well, y'all, James Madison is now going to become the Secretary of State. James Madison is the Secretary of State, and it's his job to deliver these things. But he doesn't. He refuses. He's like, yeah, this dude was appointed, but I have his paperwork. This paperwork says that dude's appointed. It's my job to deliver it. I'm just not going to do it because I don't want the Federalists to have any more judges. So he refuses to deliver. So we live in America. What does Marbury do? Marbury sues Madison. Okay. Now, Marshall, by the time this case gets to the Supreme Court, Marshall is the Chief Justice. And so you think, oh, well, that's an easy victory for the Federalists. Like, Marbury's going to be appointed. Okay, so that's how it looks. So Marshall's the Chief Justice, but he walks a tightrope because he declares that Marbury cannot force the government to appoint him. So he walks a tightrope, he kind of walks a fine line, if you will, by saying that Marbury cannot force the government to appoint him. In effect, he said, Marbury, you're right. He's basically saying, Mr. Marbury, you're correct. The government, that is your appointment. You should be appointed. But it's not constitutional. Basically, that's what he's saying. Like, I can't force the government. I can't, as the Chief Justice, I can't force the government to do this, right? So in effect, he said Marbury was right, but it's not constitutional. What this does is the big thing about Marbury v. Madison is that it set the precedent for who will decide constitutionality. That's the big thing that it does here. It decides, this sets the precedent that the Supreme Court decides whether those things are constitutional. If you remember from back in Chapter 8, we talked about the Alien Sedition Acts. Then we mentioned the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions when Madison and Jefferson said the states should get to determine if laws are legal. Here, in the Marbury v. Madison case, John Marshall says he sets the precedent that the Supreme Court will decide constitutionality. Okay? Decide whether or not things are constitutional. So again, Marbury is told, like, hey, look, you're right. But basically, the way this whole thing went down, it's unconstitutional, and I can't force the government to appoint you. I can do a lot of things, but I can't do that. Okay? So, from there, we move on. Now, let's actually look at what happens under Jefferson's presidency. Okay? While Jefferson, while in office, Jefferson didn't get rid of all of the Federalist ideas. He kept the bank because the Secretary of Treasury advised him to. And he just made adjustments to many things. Remember, y'all, Jefferson didn't like the National Bank. He wasn't a supporter of that idea. But when he becomes president, the people he listens to, his advisors, his Secretary of Treasury says, no, look, it's a good thing, you should keep it. So he does. He just made adjustments. He didn't come in and say, all of these Federalist ideas, let's get rid of them all. He just makes adjustments as needed. Okay? One of the things he does is he brings the Naturalization Act back down to 5 years. He brought the Naturalization Act back down to 5 years. Also, he didn't get rid of the Navy. He just decreased it and weakened it. Okay? So, Adams built it up. Here, Jefferson's going to let it fade away. He gets rid of some of those ships. He doesn't totally get rid of it. He just decreases it. He weakened it. He didn't want a Navy that could be used to help a revolution, whether it was in our country or around the world. He didn't want our Navy to be going out and doing things around the world. That's not what Jefferson thought was the right thing to do. Okay? This is going to be impactful with the Barbary pirates. Jefferson sent a small navy to Tripoli to fight, but ultimately it was too weak, and the U.S. is going to end up paying tribute to the pirates until 1850. So again, y'all, we see that those Barbary pirates, again, here, how do you deal with pirates? How do you deal with a bully? You pay them off or you beat them up. And Jefferson weakened the military. He weakened the Navy so much that it wasn't able to beat these pirates. And so we will kind of basically lose the Tripolitan War. We're not going to ultimately be able to win that and stop the bullies, the pirates, from demanding tribute. So we're going to pay them off until 1850. Okay? Now that brings us to the moves us to the Louisiana Purchase. Okay? So, Napoleon comes back into play. Okay? Napoleon wants to restore glory And so we get a secret treaty between Napoleon and Spain. Y'all, I'm going to try to simplify this and I'm going to try to shorten it up as much as possible. Okay? So we get a secret treaty between Napoleon and Spain for the Louisiana Purchase. It's called the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Okay? But so Napoleon basically gets Louisiana from Spain in the Treaty of San Ildefonso. But the treaty says if he doesn't want it, he has to give it back to Spain. Now, Jefferson, this secret treaty is not super secretive. People will find out about it. Now, Jefferson doesn't like the idea of Napoleon getting too strong, so he's kind of worried about this. Now, for all of this to work out, for Napoleon, the way he sees it is that Louisiana Purchase, the Louisiana Territory, is a huge, huge piece of property. Okay? Think of it as the car. Okay? A brand new car Napoleon just got. The keys to the car, however, in Napoleon's mind, are the little island nation of Haiti. Okay? So, the way Napoleon sees it is that for all of this to work out, France needed Haiti. Again, at the time they call it Saint-Domingue or Santo Domingo. But what happens here is we're going to have a slave revolt on the island. There's going to be a slave revolt in Haiti led by Toussaint Louverture. Now, Toussaint Louverture to many people is known as the Black Napoleon. Okay? What's unique about this slave revolt was that it was not just simply a slave revolt. It's going to lead to a total revolution in Haiti. So, Napoleon needed Haiti to make Louisiana profitable. Y'all, so again, somebody gives you a brand new car but says, sorry, I don't have the keys. Well, yeah, you could hotwire it. I know we could get all technical on that stuff. You could find ways to make it work. But you need the keys to really make it function, right? So Napoleon sees Louisiana as the car, Haiti as the keys to the car. Well, this is what we're looking at. We're going to see some slave revolts in the island led by Toussaint Louverture, okay? Eventually, Napoleon gives up and realizes that he cannot overtake the island. So, y'all, these slave revolts turn into a total revolution on the island of Haiti. Y'all, I've told you multiple times in this class, there's really only one slave revolt, basically in history, that was successful, and that's this one. Because Haiti is so dominated by slaves, like the overwhelming majority of the population in Haiti were slaves. They start this slave revolt, it turns into a full-on rebellion, and they are fighting not only for, the slaves are fighting for their freedom, but the nation of Haiti begins to fight for its independence from France. Okay? So ultimately, Napoleon realizes that he can't retake the island again, and so that leads him to decide to want to sell Louisiana. If I don't have the keys to the car, let me sell the car. Haiti was the keys. When he loses Haiti to Toussaint Louverture in a slave revolt in Haiti, he decides, you know what, let's sell the car. Okay? So, that's where it comes up. Now, if you're trying to sell something that isn't perfect, you're trying to sell something that, in your mind, isn't worthwhile, you might get rid of it for a pretty cheap price. So, Jefferson sends James Monroe and Robert Livingston to negotiate with Napoleon. Jefferson told Monroe and Livingston, you can spend $10 million on New Orleans and the land east of the Mississippi River. You can spend $10 million on New Orleans and land east of the Mississippi River. But Napoleon was scared. Napoleon is scared of of the British and the Americans working together. He's scared of a lot of different things. Again, y'all, he's trying to conquer the world, so he's fearful of a lot of different possibilities. So Napoleon was scared of an Anglo-American alliance, or Spain, or Britain getting the area. Y'all remember, he's supposed to give it back to Spain if he doesn't want it, right? He's not going to do that. Now, somebody just gave you a car. If you can take that car and sell it, aren't you going to do it? Like, yeah, I'm supposed to give it back to you, but I can sell this car and make some money, and that money can help me, right? So, Napoleon is scared of an Anglo-American alliance. He's scared of Spain or Britain getting the area. So, he ends up selling all of the Louisiana Territory to Louisiana for $15 million. So, y'all, Monroe and Livingston are there. Hey, we'll offer you $10 million for New Orleans and the land east of the river. Napoleon comes back, how about $15 million, and I give you the entire Louisiana Territory. Okay? So y'all, we end up buying all of it for $15 million. It works out to roughly 3 cents an acre. But here's the catch to it all, y'all. Remember when we talked about loose and strict interpretations of the Constitution? I told you that Jefferson was a strict interpretation, right? Like, he believed in interpreting it very strictly. There's no wiggle room. You know, there's no clause in the Constitution that tells you how the government should go about buying property, buying more land. It's not in there. But Jefferson sees this as an opportunity too good to pass up. Y'all, this troubles Jefferson for like basically the rest of his life because he is a strict interpretationalist, but he recognizes it's stupid of him and the U.S. government not to take this deal. So again, the U.S. buys Louisiana property. Again, y'all, Louisiana at this time is a huge chunk of land. It's not just what we think of as Louisiana today, y'all. It is so big that it literally doubles the size of the United States. Okay? But again, there's no clause in the Constitution that allowed the president to do this. Jefferson's a strict constitutionalist, so it really bothers him. But what it does do is it reinsures his re-election. Y'all, this happens in 1803. Literally, he just doubled the size of the nation in 1803. In 1804, he's up for re-election, and he's going to win easily. Okay? Basically, this is going to be the end of the Federalist Party. Y'all, they really begin to lose power. They're going to be a minority. We see the Federalists are really starting to fall apart here after the Louisiana Purchase, because now all of this new land, what's going to happen to it? Maybe some more farmers, right? Which group of people, which political party did farmers unite with? The Democratic, Republicans, and Jefferson. So this really hurts the Federalists, and this is really kind of the beginning of the end for the Federalist Party. But the question becomes, what do we do with all this land? Yo, if I just gave you a brand new car, I pulled into your driveway and say, hey man, here's your new car. What's the first thing you're gonna do? You're gonna go, you're gonna sit in, you're gonna check it out, you're gonna look at everything, right? You want to, in essence, explore your car. Well, that's what we're gonna do. Jefferson is gonna send Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the territory. They traveled over 8,000 miles. They started in St. Louis and eventually went all the way to the Pacific. This would give the U.S. a claim to the Oregon Territory later in the future. This was not part of the purchase. Remember, y'all, that the Louisiana Purchase did not go all the way to the Pacific. Okay. If you took Louisiana and you just went, it has a little boat. And y'all, again, I don't have my maps. I don't have my big drawings that my perfect oval-shaped United States. But the Louisiana Purchase did not go up. You've seen me draw that oval enough. So imagine that oval with the Mississippi River coming down. It didn't go from the Mississippi River all the way to the West Coast. It just kind of, in essence, created a Y, right? It went up from Louisiana and wide out like that until you got to the top with Canada. So stuff west of, say, the Rocky Mountains, like California, Oregon, Washington State today, that was not a part of the Louisiana Purchase. But what happens is that because they go all the way there, they will eventually, it will give the United States a claim to that territory later on. Again, so William and Clark are sent by Jefferson to explore the territory. They started in St. Louis. Now that's why in St. Louis they have the Arch, right? Because St. Louis is known as the gateway to the West. Why? Because William and Clark left from there. They started in St. Louis and went west. They traveled 8,000 miles. Okay? So, big deal there. Now, that brings us back to Burr. Burr and Hamilton. Yeah, I told you Aaron Burr is a dude who really wants glory. He's that guy who, when he saw the opportunity with the election of 1800 to try to gain some territory, he went for it. Okay? Or excuse me, gain some power, he went for it. Now, Burr and Hamilton, they're both from New York, and Burr will be a part of several crazy schemes. But one of them was to unite New York with New England, which that's where there are a lot of Federalists, and Burr's a Democratic Republican, but he's kind of wishy-washy, right? Burr's one of those guys that he's on whoever side can get him the most power. So Burr has a bunch of crazy schemes, but one of them was to unite New York with New England and separate from the rest of the states. He in essence wants to separate all the Federalists, New England and New York, and say, look, we're all one group, we're going to leave the United States, we're going to create our own nation. That was one of his ideas. Now, most people think it's crazy, including Hamilton. Now, Burr challenges him to a duel. Okay, Burr's going to challenge Hamilton to a duel because there's just a ton of there's a lot of name calling, disrespect. Aaron Burr feels personally affronted by all of this, and so there's that. So what happens is that there's a lot of differing reports, but y'all, typically when you have the duel, you have the two people stand on either side. Now, if somebody challenges to a duel at this time, very typically it was bad. I don't want to say bad conduct, but it didn't do well for your reputation to just not go to the duel. You had to accept it. If you didn't accept the duel, you were looked down upon by many people in society. So Hamilton accepts it, but he's not super interested. Now, there's a lot of debate over what happened, okay? There are debates because, y'all, a lot of times people would get to the point where, like, okay, we're going to duel, but neither one of us really want to kill the other person, so I'm going to take my pistol and I'm going to shoot up straight in the air. Or if I'm really angry with you, but I don't want to get involved in killing you, I'll shoot, but I'll make sure I shoot way over your head, right? So I shoot towards you, but I shoot over your head. Or if we're really actually engaged in this, the people would shoot at one another. Well, there are varying reports of whether Hamilton shot directly in the air, whether he shot over the top of Burr's head, but regardless, he fires his pistol and he does not kill Burr. Burr, on the other hand, shoots, fires, and injures Hamilton. Hamilton will die, and this is going to be a pretty interesting thing. So most reports show that Hamilton shot up in the air, or at least not at Burr. Some reports do show that some reports show that Hamilton shot Burr, but for the most part, most people look at Hamilton not shooting at Burr, but Burr still shooting at Hamilton and ultimately killing him. Now, understand this. This is the sitting vice president who just engaged in a duel and killed a man. That's the vice president, y'all. Like, this is some crazy stuff, and it's not the last we'll see of Burr. Okay. Now, I'm gonna show you this. New Orleans used to have a couple wax museums. I went to one of the wax museums. This one has since shut down. But that wax museum basically did the story, the history of Louisiana. And one of the things is that allegedly Napoleon negotiated the Louisiana Purchase while sitting in a bathtub. Okay, so the picture you're seeing right now are all of the negotiations with Napoleon on the Louisiana Purchase. What's also really interesting about all of this, y'all, is that, again, these are all wax figures that are all made. This is an entire wax take on what it would have been like at the Louisiana Purchase negotiations. What's really interesting about this, though, that this tub, the real tub, is allegedly in a hotel in New Orleans. I can't remember which hotel it is, but if you want, you can go and stay in that hotel room. That hotel room rents out for around $500 to $1,000 a night, depending on the time of year. So if any of you are really interested in going into that tub that where allegedly Napoleon was at when the Louisiana Purchase was agreed upon, feel free, contact me. I'll find the link and I'll let you know. But it's a pretty pricey room to stay in. Okay, so continuing on with Jefferson's presidency, I told you it wasn't going to be the last we see of Burr. Burr has a Louisiana conspiracy. Burr is going to be indicted for killing Hamilton, and he fled to Spanish Florida. Okay, there he talks with James Wilkinson. He talks with a man named James Wilkinson about separating Louisiana from the United States to create a new nation. But they're found out. Burr is put on trial with the Supreme Court, and the case is going to set two major precedents. Okay, we'll get to those precedents in a second. If you're wondering about how Burr is not put on trial for murder, it's a long story, y'all. I'm not going to go into detail, but long story short, how can I put it? Where he killed Alexander Hamilton is, they actually went to New Jersey, even though they're both from New York. They crossed the river, they went to New Jersey because the rules were a little bit more lenient in New Jersey. So there's going to be this big workup around it, but ultimately Burr is not put on trial for Hamilton's death, but he is put on trial here for treason. But they're found out. Burr is put on trial with the Supreme Court. This case sets two major precedents. The first, executive privilege is used. Jefferson refuses to obey a subpoena by John Marshall. So John Marshall said, Jefferson, come sit before me in my court and tell me about all this. And Jefferson said no. Jefferson just refuses to obey the subpoena by John Marshall. And it's not because he thinks he's bigger than the court, but he feels that the presidency is bigger than the court. He uses executive privilege, a separation of powers, right? All three branches of our government are supposed to be separate and equal. Well, Jefferson uses the logic that if I, the president, go and sit before your court, Mr. Marshall, then that's showing that the Supreme Court is higher than the presidency. So Jefferson, the person, doesn't refuse to show up in court. Jefferson, the president, refuses to show up in court because he's worried about the precedent will set. So it set this precedent of executive privilege. Basically, there are certain things that the president, I don't want to say that he can't do or that he's not going to do, but he has ways around certain things. Okay? Now, the next part of this, the next major precedent, is that it stated that treason could only be found if there were two witnesses to the same overt act. Treason could only be found if there were two witnesses to the same overt act. So, the prosecution didn't get two witnesses, so Burr walked free. Think about that. That's really, really interesting here. Because it was just Burr and Wilkinson, there was never a third person to see it. So it's kind of like a he said, she said thing. And it's two witnesses to the same overt act. So if Burr does something with Wilkinson and nobody sees it, and then Burr does something else with somebody, with another person, that's two witnesses to two different acts, right? So two witnesses to the same overt act. Okay? Now, let's look at where we can go from here. Now, with Burr and all of his crazy schemes out of the way, Jefferson has to deal with international problems. War rises again in Europe. So, the domestic side of Jefferson's stuff is kind of done. But he has other things to deal with. He has some international problems. War rises again in Europe. Now, France, under Napoleon, has a big army, and Britain has an almost unstoppable navy. And the two are going to continue to battle for world dominance. So Napoleon is trying to conquer Europe and eventually the world, at least that's his hope, right? So he builds up this incredible army. Great Britain is a tiny little island nation, but they have an almost unbeatable navy. And so the two are fighting over this. Jefferson, just like Washington and just like Adams, tried to be neutral. He tried to stay out of the war. But it's getting hard because both France and Britain are disrespecting U.S. neutrality. Okay? Both France and Britain are disrespecting U.S. or American neutrality. Despite all of the problems, many American merchants continued shipping because the profits were worth the risk. Y'all, these American boats, if they can make it to France or make it to England and make it back, they could be super rich. It's very dangerous. They might not make it there and back, but if they do, they could be super rich because both sides needed stuff. Britain's a little island nation, right? So they don't have a lot of stuff. So the French Navy is going to try to stop boats from getting to Great Britain. And Great Britain has an incredible navy, so they're going to try to stop any American ships from getting to France. So either way, if you make it there and back, you can make a ton of money. But it was really hard to do. Okay? The problems heat up with the British when we get the Chesapeake affair. Again, the British believed once an Englishman, always an Englishman. So they continue to impress American sailors into their navy. And they even increase it. Again, they continue to impress American sailors into their navy. We get big problems because the British ship, the Leopard, stopped the American ship, the Chesapeake, 10 miles off the U.S. coast. Y'all, just 10 miles. Y'all, on a clear day, you could see 10 miles. You could see for 10 miles on a clear day. Okay, so the British ship, the Leopard, stopped the American ship, the Chesapeake, just 10 miles off the U.S. coast. It took 4 men from it. The British also killed 3 and wounded 18 more men in the process. So they killed 3 men. They took 4 men off the boat and wounded 18 in the process. It's one thing to have that happen off the coast of England or off the coast of France, but 10 miles off the American coast, that outraged Americans. But Jefferson tried to refrain from war. He instead wanted to use peaceful coercion with his Embargo Act of 1807. It stopped the export of all American goods. Okay, the Embargo Act of 1807 stopped the export of all American goods. We would trade with no country. It was supposed to hurt Britain and France, but it hurt Americans more because we were not able to trade. So in very much think about the current state of America right now while we're dealing with COVID-19, right? So basically telling people not to gather. It's supposed to help Americans, right? It's supposed to help our health. But what is it in turn doing? It's hurting businesses in our community because they're not getting business like they normally would, right? So that's what's happening here. To protect American ships, Jefferson says, don't trade with anybody. Don't interact with anybody. But what happens is that business goes down because nobody's interacting. Nobody's trading, okay? So smuggling grew and the Embargo Act failed. People are going to be like, well, look, I might not be allowed to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So smuggling rises and the Embargo Act fails. Now in 1809, right before Jefferson leaves office, remember, Jefferson gets elected in 1800, he gets re-elected in 1804, he's going to get out. He's not going to run again in 1808, but he's still president for a little bit in 1809, right? Remember when Adams did the midnight appointments? This is when Jefferson is going to do, he's going to issue the Non-Intercourse Act. So in 1809, Jefferson repealed the Embargo Act and put in its place the Non-Intercourse Act. This opened up trade with all countries except Britain and France. And it said we would trade with whichever one of them started respecting our neutral rights first. But neither one really does. So Embargo Act, it said no trade with anybody. The Non-Intercourse Act says we can trade with everybody but Britain and France. But if one of them starts to be nice to us, then we'll trade with that one. Okay, so trying to get them to trade with us. But neither one of them really does. Now, in 1808, James Madison was elected, and it will take over shortly after the Non-Intercourse Act is put in place. Okay, so 1808, James Madison is elected. 1809, Jefferson passes the Non-Intercourse Act. Then a little bit later in 1809, Madison takes over. Now, Madison will have similar ideas about neutrality as Thomas Jefferson. He wants peaceful coercion. Okay, he wants peaceful coercion. He wants to coerce Britain and France to be nice to us, but he wants to force them to be nice to us without bringing the military into it. Peaceful coercion. The Americans will now come up with Macon's Bill number 2. Okay, Macon's Bill number 2 reopened trade with Britain and France, but it said if one of them started respecting our neutral rights, we would favor them. So, Embargo Act. Let me go back to this for a second. Embargo Act of 1807. Don't trade with anybody. Non-Intercourse Act of 1809. Trade with everybody but Britain and France. If one of them plays nice, we'll trade with them. Now we get Macon's Bill number 2. Macon's Bill number 2 reopened trade with Britain and France. So it reopens trade with Britain and France. But if one of them is nice to us, if one of them respects our neutrality, we would favor them. France agrees, but not fully. And at first, Britain ignores it. This really upsets some people, and they begin calling for war. They will get the nickname War Hawks. Okay? So, Britain ignores it at first. Britain just ignores it, doesn't respond, and so many Americans get all mad about it. French say, yeah, we'll accept it, maybe kinda if you do this. So France agrees, but not fully. And at first, Britain ignores it. So now this leads to Madison asking for war. Okay? So remember, Madison is a Democratic Republican. They were anti-British. They were pro-French. The British ignore us at first. The French say, oh, sure, we'll work with you. They don't really mean it, but they say, sure, we'll do it. And so now Madison is going to ask for war. However, before the U.S. officially declares war, Britain comes back and says it will respect our neutral rights. So before we actually declare war, Britain says, hey, no, sure, we'll respect, we'll be nice, we'll play nice. But the news does not get to the U.S. until after we've declared war. So they said they would play nice. Like, at first they don't say anything. Then they say they'll play nice. But by the time we hear that they're gonna play nice, that they're gonna be nice to us, what happens? We have already declared war, so we get a war. That war will be what we call the War of 1812. Y'all, I'm gonna stop this recording here. This will be the first part of Chapter 9. We will pick up the second part of Chapter 9 in the next video. So y'all make sure you watch both videos for Chapter 9. Okay, so I'm going to finish Chapter 9 in the next video. The second part of Chapter 9 will be all about the War of 1812. Okay, I'll see y'all in the next one.